Good morning. Hello and welcome. My name is Katie Gardner. I'm the Director of Events for The Hill. We're delighted to have you all here today, this morning, for our Building a Healthier Planet Newsmaker event with Senator Ed Markey. He is a national leader in the climate conversation and chair of the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Clean Air, Climate, and Nuclear Safety. First, I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor for today, McDonald's, for their support of the program. And throughout our conversation with Senator Markey, we'll explore the current landscape of the ongoing climate crisis and what can be done to minimize present disasters while slowing future impacts. As climate leaders from across the globe return from COP27, we'll discuss what's at stake both home and abroad. We'll cover his legislative priorities, the importance of environmental justice, the role of public-private partnerships, and more. And before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here in the room, thank you for joining us. We're also live streaming this event on thehill.com and on our social media platforms. So please keep your phones on silent in the room, but we do encourage you to join the conversation on social media. We're at The Hill events, and we'll be using the hashtag #TheHillClimate. It's now my pleasure to welcome Jenna Gent, Vice President of Public Policy and Government Relations at McDonald's, for a few welcome remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Katie, thank you very much. As Katie mentioned, I am in fact Jenna Gent. I oversee public policy and government relations at McDonald's, and I am happy to have just a minute to tell you all why we are so happy to be able to sponsor this program. It is no secret that, everybody knows McDonald's for something. We're very proud of the things that you probably know us for, our tasty Big Macs, world famous fries, those kinds of things. And it also is no secret that we are really big. Really big. We are part of the community fabric in 40,000 communities in 120 countries around the globe. We feed 65 million people a day. That's about 19 million pounds of potatoes for anybody who's counting. So those are the things you know us for, just by default, but we also really want you and want everyone to know us for the contributions that big footprint makes in the climate space. We are equally proud of and excited about the fact that we were the first company to set a goal of reducing our carbon footprint. We are part of Ag Mission, which is working to reduce climate and greenhouse gas emissions, which you all know. We are working to do things like improve the sustainability of our supply chain, whether that's in coffee, whether that's in beef, all of those, which is hard, as you all know, but we are working on all of those things. We want to be as well known for those things as we are for the retirement of the McRib, for instance. So this opportunity to hear Steve, to hear from the Senator, is a great opportunity for us to help you all learn, to take that away from this room. We really look forward to working with the Senator, to working with the DC community, with the policy community, to advance the policies that will help this country reach its sustainability goals. We, again, are big, and we want to be part of solving big problems and solving big challenges. You all know that. The value of public-private partnerships is critical, and we look forward to working with all of you in those things as well. So with that, Katie, I think you're going to do our introductions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna. And thank you again to McDonald's for your support of today's conversation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Ed Markey, Chair of the Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on the Clean Air, Climate, and Nuclear Safety, and Chair of the Senate Climate Change Task Force, in conversation with Steve Clemens, contributing editor at The Hill.
Great. Thank you very much, Jenna. Thank you, Katie. Senator, great to see you.
Oh, great to see you, Stephen. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to do a little shout out. Hello to everybody on streaming land. It's great to be with all of you as well, but I want to do a shout out to my friend, former Congressman Phil Sharp, who's here today, and he's done so much for Resources for the Future. Wow. But I was with former Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz, who continues to say that one of the most important people in the environmental world is Phil Sharp. The other happens to be sitting next to him, Ron Christie. And Ron Christie has, I think, about 10 students here from Cornell. And this is their final day of class, and they chose to come over and spend time here. So I just want to recognize. So good to see all of you. And I love all the rest of you as well, but they're more special. Senator, you attended COP27. I want to tell our audience, because sometimes we presume that people know what COP means. COP means Conference of the Parties. For the UN Climate Change Conference, it's held every year. This was COP27, held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. You attended. Were you happy with the results or disappointed?
It was a mixed result. On the one hand, the United States arrived having just passed a bill with $369 billion in it for wind and solar, all-electric vehicles, battery storage technology.
This was the Inflation Reduction Act.
The Inflation Reduction Act, and President Biden had signed it. So the United States has, unfortunately, because of Donald Trump, been viewed as not a leader, but a laggard, run by a climate denier, Donald Trump. And now we arrive with the largest single amount of money ever passed by any country in world history for climate. So we had credibility. We arrived saying we're ready to unleash this revolution. Credit Suisse, in analyzing the $369 billion, says that actually, because all the tax breaks are uncapped, it could wind up being upwards of $800 billion that is spent out of this bill, and unleashing upwards of $1.7 trillion of public and private investment between now and 2030. That's the good news. So we were there, the United States was back, and we weren't on the sidelines, and we were getting enormous praise for that action. At the same time, countries that are vulnerable, they were not happy with the fact that the loss and damage which they suffer still is not being recognized by the industrialized world. And so for the first time, there was a program put together to deal with loss and damage, but the details are still vague. They're still not clear.
What would that cost to get that right?
Well, the way I look at it is, I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts. I still live there.
Anybody from Malden?
In
Okay.
all blue-collar communities. And by the way, the great Phil Sharp out here, just incredible. Somebody just, his last name actually describes him. Okay, so just an incredible leader on energy issues. So I grew up in Ward 2 in Malden. In every city, blue-collar city, has the Environmental Sacrifice Ward, where all the industries are. So the Malden River in Malden, 3 blocks from my house, and my wife and I still live in Malden, in the same ward. My mother said to me when I was 10, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River. Because it was black with a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze over it. Okay, so when your mother at age 10 says, don't swim in the Malden River.
I'm laughing, but I know that's a serious thing.
Well, it was, all the coal companies, chemical companies, every Converse All-Star was made right on the Malden River. Like 1,500 people just using the Malden River as a sewer. So the reality is that this bill deals with that issue domestically. 40% of all that money that I referred to earlier, the $369 billion, which could have an infinity sign next to it, has to go to cities and towns in the United States that have environmental justice issues. Well, across the world, the United States and the other industrialized countries, we've actually used other countries as the global sacrifice wards, the global sacrifice countries, and they haven't industrialized yet. And so they have every right in the world to call upon us with a moral charge to provide the financing. So all we really were able to do with this COP was to say, okay, we're going to put it together. What are going to be the details? Still to be determined.
So it's like an authorization without an appropriation.
Perfect to be here at the Washington Press Club. Yeah, and those words are pretty much unassailably impenetrable by ordinary citizens. And what it means is a vision without funding is an hallucination. Okay, so that's what it means. An authorization, but no money.
I just want to tell you all that's a tweetable line. If I ever heard
So no money, and now we have to work together to extract from the rest of the world the amount of money which will be in that fund. The United States has to do a lot better because 25% of the historic CO2 is red, white, and blue. So we industrialized, and we have a moral responsibility to help those countries around the world, those islands that are most adversely affected. But it doesn't help when China and Saudi Arabia still pretend that they're developing nations and that they don't have to contribute as they now become major polluters in the world. That doesn't help the discussion either. So we need to all come together and to put together the funding which is going to be necessary to remediate the harm which is being done to countries that have not industrialized yet.
Right. You know, there's so many different dimensions we could get at, but one of them is how you merge and intertwine, I don't know, America's manufacturing, its technology lead, that it brings together, you know, great purposes in climate and sustainability and makes it real. You may disagree with this, but I believe that China at some point did do that they chose solar. They were making so many solar panels that drove the price down. You could almost charge them with dumping of this, and that finding this kind of deep core industrial cause to kind of own something. And I'm just wondering, has the United States taken these kinds of issues seriously enough? I mean, I know with the IRA that we are, but are we sort of late to the game?
No. We could have done a lot better. In 2009, there were only 2,000 total megawatts of solar in the United States, which is unbelievable, given the fact that Einstein won the Nobel Prize on solar in 1922. He didn't win it for E equals MC squared. He won it for photovoltaics. So we knew how to do it.
Yeah.
The reality is that today we're up to 150,000 megawatts. So there has been a dramatic increase. Last year, 24,000 megawatts of solar were installed in the United States. On wind, we're up to 150,000 megawatts as well. We only had 25,000 in 2009. So we've come a long way, but nowhere near where we should be. Massachusetts should not be number 6 in solar deployment. And all these very sunny, southern red states behind us. Makes no sense. There's still too much denial in red states across the country, but in general, not a full understanding of the role which it can play. There are many who are trying to stop our dramatic deployment of offshore wind in our country. Oil and gas company funded lawsuits that will be trying to stall that deployment. But because of the IRA, because of this huge influx of money that we are going to be putting out there over the next 8 to 10 years, we're going to see a big change. In fact, talking about domestic manufacture in China, our bill incentivizes, I have a provision for $10 billion for domestic manufacture of all of the components for offshore wind in the United States. There's another provision for domestic manufacture of solar in the United States. In fact, 10 years from now, we might become net exporters of solar, net exporters of wind, net exporters of other technologies that are going to be incentivized in this bill. So we're now dealing with the reality of what China did, reality of what other countries did, and this bill helps to ensure that we produce here, make them union jobs to the maximum extent possible, and get competitive in this clean energy sector, and then challenge the rest of the world to match us with the subsidies that we're building in order to expedite the transition that we have to make.
You and I have a mutual friend, Richard Haas, who's outgoing as the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He wrote a really interesting piece the other day about America's stakeholding and a lot of these big public goods issues. but particularly about climate, and said, while you can look at governments, and America was derelict, say, he said, for 4 years, et cetera, what's really been impressive is the private sector, that large transnational, and if you watch the COPs that have come up, so last year Sharm el-Sheikh, next year it'll be in Abu Dhabi, the companies that are out there that want to be seen, want to kind of, the one sponsoring this is regenerative agriculture, looking at conservation, other dimensions. What was your sense of the footprint of the transnational private sector there, and do you believe they are serious?
Well, they're bottom line. If the incentives are put in place, then they'll move. If not, they're not Elisa-Mausernary institutions. General Motors didn't think it could make any money on electric vehicles, so it just kept making SUVs. If we build in the incentives for all electric vehicles, they'll move, and they are moving. We had to, in 2009, put in $500 million in order to save Tesla from going bankrupt. We did that as a Congress. We gave it to Elon Musk so that his company would not go bankrupt.
Right.
But it wasn't as though he was in a competition with American automotive companies to make electric vehicles. We just knew that it was important to have a standard that could show that this technology could be deployed. So that's why in this bill, we actually create the incentives for McDonald's and for other corporations here domestically to go to the highest level of energy efficiency for all their facilities. The tax breaks are in there. To move their fleet to all electric, the tax breaks are in there. To use much more energy sustainable technologies in all of their processes, the tax breaks are in there. Any technology that reduces greenhouse gases has a tax break inside of this bill. So we know that we have accountants with green eye shades and corporations all across America looking at those tax breaks right now so they can walk into the CEO's office and say, we can now do this. We now have a pathway that's affordable for us to be able to deploy these new, clean, efficient technologies, and the more corporations that do it, is the lower the price is going to go, and it's ultimately going to be something that we can export around the world as a technology that is affordable everywhere on the planet. So that is something I think that's happening in Europe. It's already happened in, obviously, in China, but that's part of a global industrial plan. And essentially, that's what the IRA is. It's the largest piece of industrial planning in 2 generations in the United States, coupled with
CHIPS Act.
The CHIPS Act.
That's got to make it the biggest ever, right?
When you combine it all with the CHIPS Act and the Science Act, doubling the National Science Foundation budget, and the infrastructure law, $1.2 trillion. A lot of that money goes to broadband deployment. It goes to infrastructure upgrades. If you put it all together, it's the largest piece of industrial planning since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it was much needed because we were falling further and further and further behind, especially in these key clean energy technology sectors, including automotive.
10 years from now, what would you fear would be the biggest mistakes we made with this opportunity and this investment?
That somehow or other the Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency again. And that would be the biggest mistake the country could make because the GOP is still the gas and oil party. They're still controlled by these industries. And they would do everything that they could at the EPA, at the Department of Energy, at all of the federal agencies to reduce the speed with which we were moving forward. So to a certain extent, we've kind of locked in the tax breaks because they're in the tax code. That's hard even for a party controlling the House, Senate, and presidency to undo. But that's, to me, the only obstacle. We're going to have a revolution in clean energy that's going to be the match for what we did in telecommunications in the 1990s. I was the chairman over telecommunications in the 90s in the House of Representatives. Right. A cell phone was the size of a brick Gordon Gekko had in Wall Street. And we moved to a flip phone quickly. Then a young guy out in Palo Alto came up with the idea of of a phone that you
Right.
could have in your pocket that would have the power of a computer, which not only do we all have in our pockets right now, iPhones, but every person at the COP had, because the United States invented it, lowered the price, and around the world, it got deployed. Well, we're going to do the same thing with clean energy. We're about to see the second industrial revolution. We're going
Right.
to overhaul our entire energy system in the United States, and we're going to do so because this bill provides the incentives for it to be able to be accomplished. And with it, we're going to be pulling along corporations
Right.
who will finally see that the incentives are there for them to move. And I will say, the younger people who they're hiring are going to be demanding that their
Right.
corporations move
Which I
in
want to
that
get
direction
to.
as well. Please.
How many of you are on TikTok? Be on, like, hands high. I mean, don't be. I'm not. This isn't going to the National Security Agency or anything. I am too, and I'm a big fan of Ed Markey on TikTok, who I tell people is often the youngest spirit in the room. I don't care how old he is, he's often the youngest spirit in the room. And you've got a way of connecting with people. You also knew very early on how salient climate would be with the youngest generation. When you look at the election we just had, youth are motivated by this like no other generation. So I'm just sort of interested in that cycle, Mr. Young Spirit. How do you convince people who are actually near your same real age to care more about this, as the youth do today?
Well, the alliance...
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
The alliance has to be intergenerational, intersectional, interracial, okay? We have to bring everybody in. It was just 4 years ago next week that I met with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just 4 years ago next week, and we agreed to introduce something that we called the Green New Deal. And amongst...
I was going to raise that.
Amongst 16 to 34-year-olds, it actually became like the top issue for them.
Right.
And they injected themselves into the politics of America in 2020 in unprecedentedly high numbers. And when we won the House, Senate, and presidency, those young people were saying, we want a payback. We want legislation. We want climate change legislation now. So if we didn't finish anything in 2022, we had to get that huge climate bill passed for that young generation that is out there. And in a crazy way, the young people have inspired older people. And so when we're seeing, it's on every television show now, there's got to be one ad for an all-electric vehicle on every television show. Every one of them. And it's not 19-year-olds who are going to be buying them. All of a sudden, there's going to be people with money in their pockets or a little bit older who say, maybe I should move to the all-electric vehicle. So the kids have been right, but too soon for some adults. But now the politics has changed. The dough is going to be there. If you want to buy an all-electric vehicle, you get a $7,500 tax break if you do it. And each of the big companies all realize that there is big money now, and we're going to see this revolution move very, very, very rapidly. And older people in corporations now understand that if they want to build a new building in downtown Boston or downtown anywhere, you better figure out how to make it platinum. You better figure out how to make this energy efficient. Use AI, use 5G,
Right.
use supercomputing technologies with your architects and your contractors. Figure out how to get this done, install the solar, install the energy efficiency, and get it done, or else you're going to have people giving you big problems in that city, you know, that you're not complying with the highest standards that is now expected. And guess what? It's all there for the architects and the engineers to do if you just say, I want the highest possible standard. We're not asking for something that's impossible. We're asking for something that is already available and being deployed.
How do you, Ed, create that sort of energy and enthusiasm in other countries around the world? Not that you have to do that, because when you look at it and you go out and hear the biggest criticism of the climate deals made, around, say, the U.S., it's, well, look at India. Look at Brazil, look at China to some degree, and you would sort of look at this, some would call dereliction of responsibility or failure to enact some of the climate change agreements on other big parties that today, regardless of what we did in our past, are emitting enormous amounts of bad stuff into the atmosphere. How do we create deals internationally that have traction and that are compelling domestically to those citizens elsewhere, so that people don't feel like they're saving in Malden, Massachusetts, but over in Delhi, it's a smog fest.
Well, in Brazil, it's very helpful that Lula won.
Yeah.
And a climate denier lost. It's very helpful in the United States that Biden won and a climate denier lost. It's very helpful, unfortunately, that Putin invaded Ukraine, because all of Europe now sees, oh my God, we've had that natural gas coming in from Russia, addicting us to that fossil fuel and to an agenda that took us away from moving to 100% renewables, which we want to go. So, for example, in Germany right now, they're now committed to 65% of all new vehicles will be all electric by 2030. 65% of all new vehicles.
Wow.
The United States is only at 40%, but we better get on our horse here, horsepower, I guess, and try to catch up. It should be all electric, no brakes from here on in for all of Europe and all of the United States, Japan, South Korea, you name it. Canada is moving very rapidly right now, very rapidly. So if you're in India and you're sitting there, there's big opportunities, okay? And we have to ensure that the World Bank, we have to ensure that the International Monetary Fund, we have to make sure that all of these international institutions just begin to move much more aggressively. There's too much stasis, too much resistance to moving with the same speed and urgency that the Green New Deal in the United States injected into the DNA of the bill that just passed. In terms of what Putin has now done to Europe, and they're moving much more rapidly. In terms of what Canada is doing, we need our international financial institutions to reflect that. The World Bank is not being run consistent with the objectives of investing in a way that ensures that we are incentivizing countries like India, but others around the world to move much more rapidly. We need a big change at the World Bank. We just got to get rid of this guy and move on to a future that is much more visionary in terms of where our country and our world can be.
Given that Russia has weaponized energy supply, one of the arguments that Senator Manchin, your colleague, was making about the permitting bill was we need more sources across the board, fossil and renewables, and need to revolutionize permitting because everybody needs it to move more quickly, but we need it as well because America needs to backstop its allies, et cetera, et cetera. Is the permitting bill that Joe Manchin wants to do dead, or does it have a chance?
Well, there are still discussions going on.
Like enthusiastic discussions?
Well, again, there's a balance that has to be struck to make sure that we're simultaneously engaging in permitting reform, but also not then allowing for more sacrifice zones in the Ward 2s of America, to continue, because there has been not enough public participation, or there's been a way in which these new projects are expedited that will not, in fact, be good for local communities. There's a balance that can be struck. We do need permitting reform. We just have to have the proper balance. Whether or not it can be done in the next 3.5 weeks remains to be seen. But ultimately, we need new leadership at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that is permanent. There's a chairman who's about to leave, and we need to have 5 strong commissioners there with someone like Rich Glick, who is the chairman, knowing that he has a permanent ability to go in and look at the reform that the permitting for so many of these energy projects needs.
Let me ask you finally, and then I want to go to our audience, and I may go to Tevi Troy, our former Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. I said, if you come, you get the first question. So it's a little bit corrupt here, but Tevi's usually, so make it good. But one last just fun question. I wish that we'd thought about it. I'm double-hatted. I'm contributing editor at The Hill. I'm editor-at-large of Semaphore. But the Washington Post decided to impersonate you on Twitter. They got away with it. I tried to do Amy Klobuchar. We got shut down. But they did this, and they successfully created an account in your name that was verified, and it was a big eye-opener. They wrote about this, and you wrote to, and not only this, but Eli Lilly was impersonated, others were impersonated, and you wrote to Elon Musk and said, hey, what's up and what are we going to do? And to my knowledge, at that point, he has not responded to you. You put the letters up on your Twitter account, which I follow. Yeah. And I'm wondering, has he responded to you yet? And what are your concerns about Mr. Musk and one of the world's biggest social media platforms?
Great job on Tesla. But you still have more work to do in terms of your autopilot technology. But good work, Elon. Good work on rocket science. Good job at SpaceX. However, you just have to understand that rocket science is simple compared to democracy. Much more complicated. And he doesn't understand that yet, okay? And so to the extent to which I was able, working with a Washington Post reporter, giving him permission, he just, for $8, was able to get a blue check and pretend he was me. And he did that overnight.
Did he sign on to any bills you didn't like?
Well, you know, the simple point is that it's okay if you want to put up absolute crazy stuff.
Right.
That happens all day long on the internet, as long as it's not harmful, you know, leading to a violence. However, if somebody in push for $8 can say, I'm the CDC, and you don't have to get vaccinations this winter, that now goes to the question of public health and safety in the United States of America. And that's a different subject altogether. To say, I'm Eli Lilly, and I'm going to start giving away insulin, well, that's going to destroy the stock value of Eli Lilly, which it did overnight. They lost 5% of their value. You're not going to charge for insulin, or you can impersonate a United States senator. So I said to Mr. Musk that he had to have a system that guaranteed that when someone was speaking, that it was that person.
Right.
And that you could not allow someone to impersonate someone else, because that is dangerous in a democracy. It's dangerous for our society in general. He has not yet sent back to me what the solution is.
By tweet or regular mail?
Or any, any means whatsoever. He does know who I am now. I know that. Our exchanges, I think there were, I don't think I've ever had this kind of international, when TMZ is covering it, you know it's big, okay? So it just broke through as an issue which everyone understands, because Twitter is such an essential part of our conversation in America.
It is fun to note, a fun fact, in case any of you are on Jeopardy, Elon Musk did go to the state dinner for Francois Hollande, the former French president, because I was there, I met him there. I'm not going tonight, and I don't think Elon Musk is either, so I would just share that. And then real quick, lastly, Prince William is going to be in your territory tomorrow, in your state. What's he up to in your intergenerational kind of triple-level chess, influencing the youth of the world kind of thing?
Well, Prince William, inspired by President Kennedy 60 years ago, in President Kennedy's call at Rice University for the United States to launch a moonshot within 8 years, and to invent new metals, new propulsion technologies, and to send a mission to the moon and return it safely by the end of the decade. And we were able to accomplish that. And it inspired a generation of Americans to accomplish that goal, because the Soviet Union was posing an existential threat to the United States and the world in their pursuit through Sputnik of outer space. Well, we have a new existential threat, and it's climate change.
Right.
And so Prince William is going tomorrow to the Kennedy Library, and then to announce his Earthshot awards for those companies, those individuals in the world who are making the breakthroughs that can help us to telescope the time frame that it will take in order for us to have children say that there ever was such a thing as climate change. So it's going to be a very exciting day tomorrow at up in Boston. I'll be there with Prince William.
Cool. There's obviously going to be a live stream somewhere, or we can follow it on TikTok.
He went with Princess Kate to a Boston Celtics game last night, and it was.
I just see the glimmer in your eye.
It was recombinant sports,
Yeah.
Basketball royalty, and British royalty together on the same court last night, and it's just going to continue. But I think he has an ability to help to inspire a younger generation as well. And the more attention that it gets is the more that an older generation can say, I see.
What an interesting frame, the Earth shot. The Earth shot, the moon shot. So let's go here, Tevi Troy, and then I'm going to open up for a couple of questions from some other folks. Tevi? And we've got a mic here for you. And Zach, you had your hand up? Yeah. And he's like, with the Hill, he's important. I need to go to him next. So, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Senator, for a fascinating conversation. I'm all for the development of these new renewable energy technologies. I'm very excited about them, but I'm concerned that we don't yet have the renewable infrastructure yet to sustain our energy needs. So when Steve brings up permitting reform, which I think is really important, I know there's some divides on the Democratic side of the aisle. Some are more for permitting reform, including Senator Manchin, and then others are more concerned about it.
Right.
And then the Republicans want to include all energy technologies in permitting reform. Where do you stand both within that Democratic split about permitting and on the Republican side of including all energy technologies? Because I think you'd need to unite the Democrats and get the Republicans to get a bipartisan bill through.
And we'll go short form so we get as many as we can.
Okay. Yeah, we obviously need people who are committed to getting a response here. Okay, it has to happen. We can't have a permitting system that obviously is going to lead to an explosion of more pollution, when the goal ultimately should be to reduce pollution, reduce greenhouse gases. So there has to be a solution, and I think we could reach it if people of goodwill came together. My fear is that ultimately the oil and gas and coal industry just might want too much, but you are right that we do need permitting reform to bring the wind and the solar off of the ocean, off of the deserts, into the cities where the population are, so that we can build the transmission systems that move that efficiently across our country. It's all there, but we do need transmission reform in order to accomplish that. And again, I'm just going to keep coming back. If we actually had a FERC that was fully empowered, half of these permitting issues could just be solved by reforms inside of FERC. You wouldn't even need legislation, but we need a FERC that works.
I think the Hill would love an op-ed on that from you if you want.
Excellent.
So 800 words, and I know they'll run it, okay? Zach Budrick?
Hi there, Senator. Thanks for being here.
No
Zach.
more thanks, we got to go fast.
Sorry. Okay, so first of all, I got to ask, did you see the story in the Boston Globe today about people in Somerville who are concerned that Prince William being in town is going to keep them from getting to Market Basket?
Going to keep them from what?
From getting to Market Basket.
I did not see that.
It's the most Boston story ever. I encourage you to check it out. But my main question is, I was talking to someone with Sunrise Movement recently, and he said that everybody remembers the 2010 midterms as a referendum on the Affordable Care Act, but it was also largely about Waxman Markey, which you co-sponsored, and there was no such backlash this year to a much more ambitious climate bill. What do you think has changed in terms of the public tenor?
You are right. It's always in Boston, what's the local angle? So Market Basket, customers, unhappy, and then the sub-headline is Prince William visits Boston. Okay, so that's how we are. So your question again?
I'm sorry.
Why was Waxman Markey?
Waxman Markey, two things. Number one, Henry Waxman and I were in a position to muscle the bill through, which we did, and we were able to get the votes, but we did not have a movement, which is why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I introduced the Green New Deal, so we would have a movement. Number two, there were 55 votes in the Senate for it. We passed it through the House. If we had used reconciliation in 2009, it would have become a bill, because we would have only needed 51. So moving from a 60-vote model to a 51-vote model worked in 2022. If we had done the same thing in 2009, the bill would have passed. And by now, largely, the problem would have been solved because we would have had the incentives out there 12 years ago and not today. So it's those two things. We needed a movement and we needed to move to reconciliation. In other words, 51 votes instead of 60. And with that, this legislation.
Folks, we're right at the very end, but I want to take one of the students. So which student has a brilliant question? Well, Pat, I would love to go to you, but so there any students have a brilliant question? Okay, right here, this gentleman here. Okay, great. So 10-second question.
Could you stand up, please?
Yeah.
Hi. What do you think about countries like France that get 70% of their energy from nuclear? Do you think that's part of the solution?
Terrific. So nuclear, and I'm going to give that mic to Pat Malloy real here quickly for 30 seconds.
I'll answer that quickly.
Yeah.
The incentives are in this bill to move to nuclear.
Yeah.
The problem in the United States itself is that there are 2 nuclear power plants under construction in Georgia right now. They've been under construction for more than a decade. The Vogtle plants, they now cost $30 billion for 2,400 megawatts of electricity. If you put $30 billion into offshore wind or solar, you wouldn't get 2,400 megawatts. You'd get 15 or 20,000 megawatts of electricity that we've generated. So the problem with nuclear is that it's kind of, it's just expensive. It's a very expensive way to boil water. And so I expect that there will be some nuclear, but as a percentage of the total amount of new electrical generation in our country, it's going to move much more towards renewables just because of economic reasons.
The U.S. buys 20% of its nuclear fuel from Russia. Should we be doing that?
Again, there's going to be less and less of that because plants are going to continue to retire in the United States. And it's just a reality that ultimately it will be substituted with renewable energy. And that's just a reality. In France, the plants are built by the government. In the United States, we use the private sector. So there has to be a response to the shareholder. And nuclear is becoming less and less competitive with renewables.
Pat, 10 seconds. He's got to go.
Okay, Senator Pat Malloy, I knew you when you were on the House.
10 seconds, Pat. You really got to go.
And one of the first key guys.
Yeah.
There are 2 trade issues related to the environment. One is this idea of a carbon tax for countries importing stuff that they don't put environmental controls in.
He's got to go.
Secondly, on the vehicles, electric vehicles, I think the subsidy we're giving the purchasers here, $7,500, applies only to cars made in America. I think Macron will be raising that with the president today. I wanted to throw those 2 issues out to you.
Excellent. So the question basically is the Inflation Reduction Act protectionist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, number one, we built a border adjustment tax into Markey. Henry and I built it in. And just a little story. Chancellor Merkel came to the United States later on that year in 2009. It was before it died in the Senate, Markey. And she addressed for the first time since Konrad Adenauer in 1962, a joint session of Congress. About a third of her speech was on climate. She went over to Speaker Pelosi's office afterwards, and I got a call. Speaker Pelosi, Eddie, can you come over to my office? Chancellor Merkel wants to meet with you. So I'm there out on the balcony, and Merkel says to me, in Markey, Congressman Markey, do you have a border adjustment tax? I said, yeah. He says, is it discretionary or mandatory in 2017? I said, well, it's discretionary for the president to impose it if there is unfair trade practices. And then she says, I told Sarkozy that. I knew I was right. I'm going to call Sarkozy, tell him he was wrong. So the answer is this has been an ongoing discussion, and we've got the attention of Europe. And so we say to Europe, build in bigger incentives. Go faster. Move to wind and solar, all electric vehicles, faster. Move to hydrogen faster. Build in your incentives. Don't tell us we're giving too many incentives. You build in your incentives. We have to find a way in which we compete with the Chinese, compete with others, and show the way. So it's like, meet us or beat us. Go for it, okay? And we can work with you in terms of the short term, but in the long term, this has to be a virtuous competition that breaks out amongst countries in the world to deal with the flooding, to deal with the fires, to deal with the harm which is being done to third world countries and to people in our own countries, to black and brown people for the most part in our country and around the planet. And we have a moral responsibility. So my message would be, do better yourself. What's your legislation look like? What are you going to be passing? What are you going to be leading on? Okay? And I don't want to keep hearing about nuclear. Okay? I want to hear what you're going to be doing in your private sector, you know, to unleash all of the great French talent which you have. And then we will be where we should be, unleashing our best selves, not moaning that the Chinese are doing something, but unleashing the talent that the United States and France and Great Britain and all the countries of the world have to maximize their God-given abilities and save this planet, but especially those who are most vulnerable. That would be my answer to you.
You know what I would say, just, and I think this probably does now. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. This is the last in a series of conversations that McDonald's has supported the Hill, and I'm just very honored to have been a part of them. But you never, I've known this man here for a long time. You never leave the same after an encounter with Senator Ed Markey. So thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much to Steve and Senator Markey. That brings us to the end of our program today. So on behalf of the Hill and our sponsor for this conversation, McDonald's, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in the room and those who joined us and tuned in online. If you are watching online or in the room and missed any part or want to relive any part of today's conversation, the video will be available shortly on thehill.com. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Hey, Ed, we're going to take a quick photo here with Rachel.